What's going on, guys? Andrew of New Art Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking about some Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains episode 82, and let me just start off by saying this is the most straight-up, I'm the main protagonist of a shonen anime shenanigans that we've seen in this show so far. You know, Go's whole gimmick is that when he bonded with this AI, he managed to create a skill called anti-skill that allows him to negate skills within his duel. So what's the part of the premise of this duel? Well, Playmaker, one of his strongest, strategies and such is the fact that he's able to use Storm Access to generate a new card. Then, in order to overcome Bowman, or at least bring it to a draw, I should say, he manages to even level up his Storm Access, but that won't help him against Go, because Go has anti-skill. Well, what happens? Playmaker literally just straight up is like, yeah, I'm gonna use it anyway, I'm gonna use Neo Storm Access. Go cancels it, and then I's like, oh yeah, I forgot, there was one other side effect to that. When you don't manage to add a card, then you get to add a random card, and you get to draw cards. So in some ways, Neo Storm Access just becomes more powerful when it gets canceled out, and it kind of pulls away from Go's character and makes this duel feel very... It takes away the weight of it, I guess is what I'm getting at here, because... essentially, before the whole Neo Storm Access thing, I didn't think Playmaker's shenanigans had been too terrible. I mean, the whole Storm Access present within this show entirely is a little bit of that main protagonist cheating type of thing, because obviously they're going to generate a card that's going to help them to win 99% of the time, right? Or they're going to draw a card, top decks like Yukimoto, or whatever. But, then most of the time, Playmaker was actually showing skillful plays. He was paying attention to card resources. In his duel against Bowman, he was keeping cards in his hand to be able to still have moves for the next turn. He was thinking things through. Of course, AI ends up stopping him in that case, but still, he was playing very strategically, and it didn't feel too much like main protagonist cheating. Then we got Neo Storm Access, which was like a leveled up form in order for him to beat out Bowman. And then here, we find out that he basically gets, once more, a buff, practically, and from having his skill cancelled. So it kind of detracts from the strength of Go's character, and it kind of takes away the weight of the duels moving forward, in my opinion, because if they're willing to continue to upgrade the strength of Yusaku's skills when he goes to use them, then when are we ever sure if he's really in a corner or not? It's kind of like, oh, well, he's backed up against a wall, but here's this other thing I forgot about. Notice how that whole forgetting thing has kind of happened twice with I now. He didn't mention the Neo Storm Access thing. I mean, I guess it wasn't forgetting, but he didn't mention it to Yusaku, and it was there. And he didn't mention the second effect of the skill either, and now it's suddenly there as well. I mean, so they could just keep compounding with this. And that frustrates me a little bit about this episode, which, it doesn't detract from the feeling as a whole, because I think the writing leading up to this point has been pretty good with, Go's vendetta and those types of things. So it still was a decent episode in my mind, but definitely a downgrade in quality from some of the other ones we've seen, because once more, I just feel like they kind of took away from the weight of the duel and the believability that maybe Playmaker will actually lose. And Go was dueling really well here. I mean, Yusaku had to play through multiple counters that Go had prepared for him in order for him to win, even after he succeeds with the Neo Storm Access, sort of hack type of thing, in order to manage to use it still, despite Go's anti-skill. And even after he manages to Xyz summon, which is the first time we've seen this in the show and catches everybody off guard, Go is still almost prepared to deal with that situation. Yusaku just barely pulls it through. So, pulling away from some of the negatives, what did I enjoy about this episode? I liked seeing Go duel competently. I think that's one thing that they've really hit the nail on the head on with this whole arc with him bonding with an AI, is before this, he never felt like a super threatening duelist. Much like a lot of our side characters in the show, they haven't given him a very relevant on-screen win yet, which I always feel kind of detracts from the potential of the character and, feeling like they're important when they show up on screen. It's like, are they really going to win? Or if they are going to win, they're probably against a character that's not very important, like those random Knights of Hanoi they generated in Season 1 for Go and Aoi to duel against, right? So being able to see him actually nearly defeat Playmaker, and honestly, it's pretty obvious that if Playmaker wouldn't have managed to use main protagonist hacks, he would have defeated Playmaker. That to me was pretty cool to see. It shows that he's growing as a character. And adding to that character growth, even when he manages to lose the duel, we see tears dripping from his eyes and a flashback scene to a lot of his what would probably be his fondest memories of when he was kind of going with his old persona, when he was still kind of the entertaining guy, the guy who was kind of based off pro wrestlers, when he was doing things to inspire the kids around him, and when he was dueling and having fun with it for the most part. He wasn't caught up in this vendetta, and then he's kind of crying and holding his arm up towards Playmaker. Now, that could be interpreted two ways. Some would say, you know, that's him being frustrated that even after sacrificing all of that, he didn't defeat Playmaker. But the way I interpret it, especially based off the themes Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of has consistent across all of its shows, is that Go may have just realized everything he sacrificed was more valuable than defeating Playmaker in the first place. And because of Playmaker beating him, somehow that came to his mind. For whatever reason, duels are often used to kind of bring people back around to the good side of things within Yu-Gi-Oh! And one of their big themes is friendship, the value of bonding and staying loyal to people. And that would go very well in line with what Go's doing, and I highly doubt, because of the way he's written, we're going to see Go stay evil. It's kind of rare in Yu-Gi-Oh! To even see a main antagonist stay evil entirely. So for Go to stay evil, especially when he started off someone fighting at Playmaker's side and who was such a positive influence on people, would be very surprising, and him turning around right now would be great timing, considering it seems like we're lining up towards that big conflict between the AIs and the people coming, and unfortunately they like to use him as a pawn to set up the villains because he's supposed to be a strong duelist, so they like to have him get defeated, and it would be just about the right time if he switches sides to duel alongside Playmaker for that to happen. It also seems like Earth's going to be still inside of him, so it would make a lot of sense for him to maybe come back to Playmaker's side, considering, you know, a lot of the big climax that we're heading towards with this arc seems to be the AIs facing one another and where the lines are drawn in the sand with that. And if Go's weaker, a little more open-minded now, Earth might be able to get through to him finally if he is still existing within Go, because Earth's going to want to side with Aqua based on his relationship with her, right? So on the whole, I think this duel was a pretty good development for Go, but once more, his whole loss there was kind of frustrating. So while we're on the topic of his loss, one of the big reasons Yusaku was able to win was he pulls an XZ summon essentially out of his rear end, right? And that was cool to see in the show. I like the fact that now we have all of the main summoning methods except Pendulum. I'm still unsure as to if we'll see Pendulum summoning, especially with it being as prominent as it was in Arc 5 and being as big of a deal as it was in Arc 5, but it wouldn't necessarily surprise me. I do think if they're going to introduce it, I would really like it to be this kind of huge weapon used by like a main antagonist or something brought out by somebody who kind of is in a gray area of morality in the show rather than necessarily being another tool used by the main heroes. And I would like it to be maybe made a little bit bigger of a deal out of it when it's used, rather than just being, oh, there's a new form of summoning, and then just kind of rolling with it the way they did with Synchros and XZs. But, you know, that's just my personal opinion. I think seeing Pendulum summoning would be great. As I've said several times, the more summoning methods, the more variety in the duels, and I think the slightly less predictable they are. It's not just I'm spamming monsters on the field, gonna go into a Link 4 and call it a day. It's, oh, maybe I'm synchroing, maybe I'm fusioning, maybe I'm gonna play some Pendulum cards if they end up introducing that. Those types of things. But Yusaku manages to bring out Firewall Exceed Dragon, so it seems to be that they're starting to make Firewall an archetype in and of itself, in some way, shape, or form. Either that or it's just kind of going along with the Cyverse dragons that he's using in some way, shape, or form. But regardless, got a pretty cool effect. The whole idea of it gaining attack based off link markers is kind of cool. One theme I have noticed with both Yusaku's Fusion and XZ's monster that he uses in his deck is they're both very glass cannon-y. They gain a lot of attack really quickly, but their effects other than that are kind of lackluster to some extent. I mean, as opposed to Cyver's Quantum Dragon, that thing is insane, being able to return monsters to the hand after battling them. So I guess it kind of balances out there, and Yusaku does have a pretty powerhouse deck, so I guess I'm kind of okay with that. A lot of times with main protagonists, they do like to use a little bit more straightforward of a deck is what I've noticed. I mean, Jaden's was pretty much all-out attack with heroes. Yuki's was probably the biggest exception to this rule. Yusei's was very, like, battling them head-on, but just being a little bit smarter about it than them. Yuma's kind of falls in line with that, as well as Yuya's. So it kind of sticks with the theme of the main protagonist, and I guess that kind of coincides with the whole archetypes oftentimes sort of fall in suit with the characters' personalities to some extent. You know, a lot of times our main protagonist is very bold, very courageous, willing to go in and fight head on, and their decks kind of reflect that, as we're seeing with Yusaku here. Sometimes I do see some similarities between them, but I feel like they've definitely deferred his characters the further we've gotten in the show. So on some other side elements to point out here, Akira he finally outright rebels against the Knights of Hanoi in this episode. You know, the Queen's telling him, no, don't remove the plug, don't pull the plug, don't separate Go from there. And what does he do? He pulls Go out anyway. And that's awesome. I think this is one more step in the direction of Akira's little rebellion, and I can't wait to see where he goes next with it. I have a feeling before the end of this arc, we're really going to be seeing Akira take his own route with things. I would love to see him even duel again, to be honest. Maybe pull out some new tricks, show us that maybe he's been studying up in the case he needs to protect Aoi or something like that. Regardless, I would just like to see Akira in action again. I think he's been a neat side character. And I think it could be really cool to see him maybe turn into this powerful duelist that just is maybe kind of reluctant about doing it, or something along those lines. I am okay with him not dueling. I do think they've done a good job writing a non-dueling character in his case, which is something I don't think the shows often get right, since the card game is often so influential as to a character's level of relevance within it. Since the show is based around card games, they oftentimes kind of end up being irrelevant or cheerleaders, or they're just kind of there in the background. Akira's managed to play a pretty decent role in the plot still. Kusanagi, I would say not quite as much. I would like to see more out of him, but we'll end up seeing where that goes. So on the whole, guys, I'd say I enjoyed this episode decently. I was very frustrated with the whole second effect of Neo Storm Access. I would have actually liked to have seen Playmaker lose, and maybe us explore that route a little bit. Maybe when Go overcomes his vendetta, he realized that wasn't really where his source of struggle was to begin with, and then from there is able to grow out of his difficulties and come to aid Playmaker, or something like that. But I guess that could have opened the envelope for all kinds of other story routes they would have had to cover without rushing it too much the way Arc 5's ending sort of ended up. So I guess some people could argue maybe they're trying to learn from that with this writing. Regardless, like I said, I enjoyed the episode for the most part. I think we've got a neat one coming up based off the episode preview, in that it's a strange meeting. It seems like we've got all of our characters that are sort of fighting against the AIs joining together, but it seems like Playmaker's sort of questioning Revolver's strategy. Maybe he's got something that's a little bit risky for everybody else involved, something that could possibly put some people in danger for the quote-unquote greater good, and that's got Playmaker sort of on the fence. I could definitely see some tensions between those two rising, but I have a feeling they're going to mostly fight together here. Very rare, much like a lot of other trends in Yu-Gi-Oh, to see the main protagonist and the main rival not team up, at least sometimes within the anime. And the other thing I could likely see happening after this episode is if Go does end up switching sides, I'm really beginning to wonder if he's going to go back to his Goki deck. I would like to see that back in action, although with Firewall having been banned, and then we've seen less of that with Yusaku, although it did show up in this duel, so I don't even know how true that theory is. And Goki's possibly getting a hit at some point just because of their swarm ability, and the fact that they've managed to maintain some level of relevance in the metagame. Maybe they're trying to stray away from that. Hard to say, very hard to say. I mean, especially with the whole people saying Firewall may disappear from the show thing, and the fact that they're calling Decode Talker now as like Ace Monster within some of the card game marketing, but yet we still see Firewall. Hard to say what level of influence that'll be. But anyway, enough of my rambling. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome. And I'll catch you guys next time with some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains.